This land is under Maple Creek jurisdiction now. Victoria Ashford slapped a folder against my chest, her heels sinking into my Montana vineyard soil. You have 72 hours to pay $3,200 in HOA dues. I stared at this woman standing in the middle of my property. Ma'am, this land is 15 acres outside your HOA. Her smile froze. Boundaries change, Mr. Dalton. We suspended your water rights this morning. My blood went cold. She'd cut off water to the grapevines I planted to honor my dead wife. Inside the folder were fake violations and a $3,200 bill for services I never requested. What she didn't know? I'd spent 25 years handling fraudulent land claims for Fortune 500 companies. She just picked a fight with the wrong architect. My name is Jackson Dalton, 54 years old, and I spent most of my adult life drawing buildings for other people. Corporate towers in Seattle, luxury condos in Denver, shopping complexes in small towns. For 25 years, I wore expensive suits and attended meetings where we discussed expanding developments instead of just admitting we were replacing older buildings. Then, my wife Sarah died, pancreatic cancer, 8 months from diagnosis to funeral. She was 49. We talked about retiring early, buying land somewhere quiet, maybe starting a small vineyard like her grandfather had in Napa Valley back in the 70s. We'd sketch plans on napkins at restaurants, laughing about ideas nobody else would understand. She never got to see any of it, but those napkin sketches stayed in my desk drawer like promises I couldn't break. So in March 2024, 6 months after her funeral, I quit, walked away from the partnership, the pension track, the corner office. I took everything we'd saved and bought 15 acres in the Bitterroot Valley of Montana, an hour south of Missoula. The land came with a half-collapsed barn, a rusted irrigation system that hadn't run since the 90s, and soil that hadn't been worked in decades. It was what I needed. No HOA, no city council, no design review boards, just mountains, sky, and silence. The first month, I lived in a camper trailer while I rebuilt the barn foundation. My hands, soft from years of holding pens, split and blistered from swinging hammers and digging post holes. Every blister represented work. Every sunrise over the Bitterroot Range represented new beginnings. I planted the first grapevines in May. Pinot Noir, Sarah's favorite. 20 rows, each one representing my commitment to the life we'd planned. I installed drip irrigation, built deer fencing, amended the soil with compost I hauled from a dairy farm 30 miles away. By July, the vines were taking root. By August, I could see the future Sarah and I had sketched starting to become real. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday in late August, slipped under my door while I was working in the South Field. White envelope, official-looking, with Maple Creek Estates HOA printed in gold letters across the top. Inside was a welcome packet explaining that my property now fell under their extended environmental maintenance district and that I needed to submit architectural plans for any structures, pay quarterly dues of $450, and attend a mandatory orientation meeting. I called the county recorder's office the next morning. A clerk named Patricia pulled up the plat maps and frowned at her screen. "That's odd," she muttered. "What's odd?" I asked, already feeling tension. "There's a boundary amendment filed 3 months ago by Maple Creek HOA. It shows an extension of their environmental jurisdiction eastward." She clicked her mouse a few times. "But it's marked pending approval, which means it was submitted but never completed the legal review process. So it's not valid?" "Correct. Legally, your property is still outside their boundaries, but someone filed paperwork making it look official." I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the welcome packet sitting on my workbench. Someone was trying to expand HOA territory through fraudulent filings, hoping landowners wouldn't check the actual legal status. It was bureaucratic theft, quiet and calculated. I should have seen it coming, but I was tired. I wanted to plant grapes and heal, not fight another legal battle. So I ignored it, threw the packet in a drawer, and went back to work. That was my first mistake. Because people like Victoria Ashford don't take silence as rejection. They take it as permission to escalate. The violations started appearing frequently. First one showed up taped to my gate, printed on official-looking letterhead, complete with case numbers and compliance deadlines. Unapproved agricultural structure, referring to my newly rebuilt barn. I'd pulled every permit through the county, paid every fee, passed every inspection, but the notice claimed my barn violated HOA architectural standards. I crumpled it and kept working. 2 days later, another notice. Non-compliant fencing material. My deer fence was standard agricultural wire, the same type used on every ranch and farm in the valley. But according to the HOA, it created visual discord with community aesthetics. Then came the major one. A certified letter claiming my vineyard created a water drainage hazard that threatened Maple Creek's stormwater management system. The letter demanded I submit an environmental impact study within 30 days or face daily fines of $500. I drove into Missoula that afternoon and met with my attorney, Robert Chen, a sharp land use specialist who'd helped me with the property purchase. He read through the notices with increasing annoyance. "Jackson, none of this is legally binding," he said, tossing the papers onto his desk. "Your property is outside their jurisdiction. They can't enforce anything. Then why are they sending this garbage?" "Intimidation," he replied flatly. "Some HOA boards get aggressive when people buy land near their boundaries. They try to extend control through fear and fake paperwork. Document everything. Save every notice. If they keep harassing you, we'll file for a restraining order." I left his office feeling slightly better but still uneasy. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stood on the porch of my rebuilt barn, looking out at the vineyard rows silver in the moonlight, and thought about Sarah. She would have hated this. She would have wanted me to fight back immediately, loudly, the way she fought everything that threatened our peace. But I was tired. So tired. Fighting had been my career for decades. I didn't want it to be my retirement too. So I made another mistake. I tried to wait it out. And that's when Victoria Ashford decided patience was weakness. The water shut off on a Thursday morning in mid-September. I turned the faucet in the barn, and nothing came out. No pressure, no trickle, nothing. I checked the well pump, tested the pressure tank, traced the lines. Everything looked functional. Then I called the county water district. A woman with a tired voice answered. "Mr. Dalton?" "Yes, we received a notice from Maple Creek HOA requesting suspension of services to your property pending environmental review." My stomach dropped. "You shut off my water because an HOA asked you to?" "We're required to comply with jurisdictional maintenance requests while disputes are under review," she explained, her tone suggesting she'd had this conversation before. "The HOA submitted documentation claiming your property falls under their district." "That's fraud," I said, my voice rising. "I have certified county maps proving I'm outside their boundaries. Sir, I understand your frustration, but we have to follow protocol. You'll need to resolve this with the HOA and the county planning department. Once they clear the dispute, we'll restore service." I hung up and stared at the silent faucet. My vineyard needed water. The vines were in a critical growth phase. Without irrigation, I'd lose months of work and thousands of dollars in plants. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was sabotage. I drove to the county planning office that afternoon, maps and deeds in hand. The clerk, a young guy who looked fresh out of college, pulled up the records and confirmed what Patricia had told me weeks earlier. The boundary amendment was invalid, never approved, legally meaningless. "So why is the water district treating it as legitimate?" I demanded. "Because someone filed it in the system," he said with a shrug. "Once paperwork enters the database, it creates confusion until it's formally challenged and removed. It's a bureaucratic gray area. How do I challenge it?" "You'll need to file a formal objection with supporting documentation. The review process takes 4 to 6 weeks." "I don't have 6 weeks," I said. "My crops are dying." He looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Mr. Dalton. That's the process." I left the office feeling something I hadn't felt since Sarah's diagnosis. Helplessness. But helplessness transformed into resolve. By the time I reached my truck, I knew what I had to do. Victoria Ashford wanted a fight? She'd get one, but not the kind she expected. That night, I made a list. Every violation notice, every phone call, every piece of fraudulent paperwork. I photographed my county permits, my approved building plans, my water rights documentation. I pulled up satellite imagery showing the clear boundary line between my property and Maple Creek Estates. Then, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called in a favor. Her name was Diana Reeves, an investigative journalist I'd worked with during a corruption scandal involving a Seattle development firm back in 2019. She'd exposed a scheme where city officials took bribes to approve zoning changes. The story won her a regional journalism award. "Jackson Dalton," she said when she answered, her voice warm with surprise. "I thought you retired to become a gentleman farmer." "Turns out farming comes with its own corruption," I replied. I explained everything. The fake boundary expansion, the water shutoff, the harassment campaign designed to force me into an HOA I'd never agreed to join. Diana listened without interrupting. "Send me everything," she said finally. "Documents, photos, timelines. If this HOA is committing fraud, I want the story." "I don't want publicity," I said. "I just want them to leave me alone. Jackson, people like this don't stop until they're exposed. You can fight them quietly and lose, or you can fight them loudly and maybe save the next person they target." She was right. I sent her the files. 3 days later, my phone rang at 6 a.m. It was Diana. "Jackson, you're not going to believe what I found." She'd spent 72 hours digging through public records, cross-referencing property filings, and interviewing former Maple Creek residents. What she discovered was shocking. Victoria Ashford had done this before, twice. In 2019, she'd been president of a different HOA in Kalispell, Montana, where she'd attempted to annex adjacent farmland using the same fake environmental district scheme. A farmer fought back, and the case was settled quietly out of court. In 2021, she'd moved to Maple Creek and within a year become HOA president. Since then, 3 properties bordering the development had been pressured into joining the HOA through intimidation, fake violations, and threats of legal action. "She's perfected a system," Diana explained. "File boundary amendments that look official but aren't legally complete. Use them to justify cutting off utilities or services. Bury property owners in fake fines until they either pay up or give up." "How is she not in jail?" I asked. "Because most people settle or walk away," Diana said. "She's betting on exhaustion. She knows the legal process is expensive and slow. By the time anyone fights back effectively, she's already moved on to the next target." "Not this time," I said quietly. "Not this time," Diana agreed. "I'm running the story next week." "But Jackson, you need to understand something. Once this goes public, it's going to get harder. She'll come at you stronger. Are you ready for that?" I looked out at my vineyard, the rows of vines Sarah and I had dreamed about, now struggling without water. "I'm ready." The article dropped on a Monday morning. Montana HOA president accused of land fraud scheme. It ran in the Missoulian with a photo of Victoria Ashford at a community meeting, smiling. Diana's reporting was direct and clear. She laid out the timeline of Victoria's previous attempts, included interviews with other landowners who'd been targeted, and highlighted the invalid boundary filing that started my nightmare. She even got a statement from a county commissioner admitting the planning department had procedural gaps that allowed fraudulent filings to create confusion. My phone exploded with calls, reporters wanting interviews, neighbors I'd never met offering support. And then, at 10 a.m., a call from an unknown number. "Mr. Dalton, this is Victoria Ashford." Her voice was ice-wrapped in politeness. "I assume you've seen the article published this morning." "I've seen the truth published," I replied. "This is far from over," she said. "You've made a very serious mistake going to the press. I'll be filing defamation charges, and the HOA board is pursuing immediate legal action for your violations." "Your fake violations based on fake authority?" I corrected. "I have county-certified proof that you have zero jurisdiction over my property. Every notice you've sent is fraudulent. Every threat you've made is harassment. And now, it's public record." Silence. Then, quietly, with venom, I could feel through the phone. "You have no idea what you've started." She hung up. I stood there in my barn, surrounded by tools and dirt and the dreams I'd built with my own hands, and realized something important. I wasn't afraid anymore. Fear had been replaced by clarity. That afternoon, 3 things happened in rapid succession. First, a county inspector showed up unannounced, claiming to investigate environmental violations on my property. He walked the vineyard, checked my irrigation setup, reviewed my permits. After an hour, he handed me a signed report. "Everything's in compliance, Mr. Dalton. I don't know who filed the complaint, but there's nothing wrong here." Second, my water turned back on. No explanation, no apology, just suddenly functional faucets. I called the water district. The same tired-voiced woman told me the HOA had withdrawn their maintenance request. "Guess they figured out they had no jurisdiction," she said dryly. Third, and most importantly, I got an email from a lawyer named Marcus Webb. He specialized in HOA litigation and had read Diana's article. "Mr. Dalton, I'd like to represent you pro bono. What's happening to you is happening to landowners across Montana. It's time someone fought back hard enough to set precedent." We met the next day at a coffee shop in Missoula. Marcus was in his early 40s, sharp-eyed, with a kind of focused intensity that comes from someone who's found their purpose. I've been tracking HOA overreach cases for 5 years, he explained. Victoria Ashford is the worst I've seen. She's not just aggressive, she's systematic. She's weaponizing bureaucracy. He pulled out a folder, thick with documents. I've already filed a cease and desist order, but I want to go further. I want to sue her personally and the HOA board for fraud, harassment, and intentional interference with your property rights. And I want to file a complaint with the State Attorney General's office for investigation of her previous schemes. How much is this going to cost? I asked. Marcus smiled. Nothing. When we win, and we will win, the HOA's insurance will cover damages and legal fees. This is about precedent, Jackson. This is about stopping her from doing this to anyone else. I signed the papers that afternoon. For the first time since Sarah died, I felt like I was fighting for something bigger than myself. That night, I walked my vineyard under a sky full of stars. The vines were recovering, their leaves greening up with the restored water. I thought about Sarah, about how she would have loved this fight. Not because she enjoyed conflict, but because she believed in standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. I'm doing this for both of us, I whispered to the night. In that vast Montana silence, I felt her presence. The lawsuit moved faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, Marcus had filed a comprehensive complaint in district court. The charges were devastating: fraudulent misrepresentation of jurisdictional authority, intentional interference with water rights, harassment through false violation notices, conspiracy to defraud through invalid boundary amendments, and the big one? Racketeering. Marcus had uncovered a pattern of behavior spanning multiple HOAs and multiple victims, which qualified Victoria's actions as organized fraud under Montana law. The local news picked up the story. Suddenly, my quiet vineyard became a symbol of something larger: the fight against HOA overreach and the abuse of power hiding behind suburban bylaws. Other landowners started coming forward. A rancher north of Missoula who'd been pressured into paying $15,000 in environmental fees to avoid a lawsuit. A couple in Kalispell who'd sold their dream property after Victoria's previous HOA had made their lives difficult with constant violations. A retired teacher who'd been fined $200 per day for a garden shed that was perfectly legal under county code but violated HOA aesthetic standards. Each story added weight to our case. Each victim became a witness. And Victoria? She made her first major mistake. She doubled down. At a community meeting, she stood up and declared that our lawsuit was a frivolous attack by someone who refuses to be a good neighbor. She claimed I was a rogue landowner trying to undermine community standards. She even suggested I was mentally unstable, grieving my wife's death in unhealthy ways by lashing out at authority. Diana Reeves was at that meeting with a recorder. The entire speech was recorded. Comments sections exploded with people sharing their own HOA horror stories. Local politicians started making statements about necessary reforms. And Marcus? He added, defamation to our lawsuit. She just gave us everything we need, he said. Public statements, recorded and witnessed, attacking your character without evidence. That's textbook defamation. But Victoria wasn't done making mistakes. Her biggest one came on a cold October morning when I woke to find heavy equipment parked at the edge of my property: a backhoe, a dump truck, and 3 workers in Maple Creek Estates uniforms. They were digging a drainage ditch that ran directly through my southern fence line. I grabbed my phone and started recording. "What are you doing?" I called out. The foreman, a weathered guy in his 50s, looked uncomfortable. "HOA contract, sir. We're installing stormwater management infrastructure." "On my property?" I asked, still filming. HOA said, "This is common area," he replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "This is private land," I said clearly, making sure the recording captured everything. "You're trespassing, and I want you to leave immediately." The foreman made a call. 5 minutes later, Victoria Ashford herself pulled up in her Range Rover. She stepped out, saw me filming, and her expression hardened. "Mr. Dalton, this work is authorized under Environmental Maintenance Code 47B. "That code doesn't exist," I said calmly. "And you have no authority here. This is the 3rd time I'm telling you, leave my property." "We have every right to install necessary drainage infrastructure," she insisted, her voice rising. "The county approved this project." "Then show me the permits." She hesitated. Just for a second, but it was enough. "I don't need to show you anything," she snapped. "This work is happening whether you like it or not." I called the sheriff. Deputy Mike Torres arrived 20 minutes later. I showed him my property deed, my fence line, and the equipment clearly inside my boundaries. He spoke with Victoria, reviewed her paperwork, and shook his head. "Ma'am, you don't have authorization to work on private property without the owner's consent. I'm going to have to ask you to remove your equipment." Victoria's face went red. "This is harassment. He's interfering with legitimate HOA operations." "He's protecting his property rights," Deputy Torres replied calmly. "If you have a legal dispute, handle it in court. But you can't dig on someone's land without permission." The equipment left. Victoria left. And I had video evidence of attempted trespassing and destruction of property to add to our lawsuit. Marcus called it the gift that keeps on giving. She's so convinced she's right that she's incapable of seeing how badly she's incriminating herself, he said. "This is going to trial, Jackson. And we're going to win." The trial date was set for January 2025. But something happened in November that changed everything. A whistleblower came forward. Her name was Patricia Moreland, and she'd been the HOA's accountant for 3 years. She contacted Marcus with a box of documents that she'd secretly copied before resigning. Financial records showing Victoria had been funneling HOA funds into personal accounts disguised as consulting fees. Email chains proving Victoria had knowingly filed false boundary amendments. Text messages between Victoria and board members discussing how to pressure landowners into compliance. And most damning of all, a recorded conversation where Victoria admitted that the environmental district expansion was creative interpretation of county codes. She's been stealing from the HOA while using it as a weapon against non-members, Marcus explained after reviewing Patricia's documents. This isn't just civil fraud anymore. This is criminal. He immediately contacted the Montana Attorney General's office. Within a week, a formal investigation was launched. Victoria Ashford was subpoenaed to testify before a grand jury. Her lawyer tried to negotiate, offering to resign from the HOA and make restitution in exchange for avoiding criminal charges. But the Attorney General wasn't interested in deals, not when the evidence showed a pattern of fraud spanning multiple jurisdictions and multiple victims. The criminal indictment came down in mid-December. 8 counts of fraud, 4 counts of embezzlement, 2 counts of filing false documents, 1 count of racketeering. Victoria Ashford's face appeared on the evening news in handcuffs, being led into the county courthouse. The expression that had once been so confident, so entitled, now looked small and frightened. I didn't feel triumphant watching it. I felt tired and sad. Sad that someone had wasted so much energy trying to control others instead of just living her own life. But I also felt something else. Relief. Because it was finally over. The civil case was settled out of court in January. The HOA's insurance company, facing overwhelming evidence and a criminal conviction of their president, offered a substantial settlement, full reimbursement for all legal fees, water shutoff damages, and crop losses. A formal apology and admission of wrongdoing. A court order permanently barring Maple Creek Estates from any claim to my property, and a $50,000 payment for emotional distress and harassment. I took the money and immediately donated half to a legal defense fund for landowners fighting HOA overreach. The rest I put into my vineyard, because that's what this had always been about. Not money, not revenge. Just the simple right to live peacefully on land I'd legally purchased and to honor the dreams I'd shared with Sarah. Victoria Ashford was sentenced in March 2025. 3 years in prison, 5 years probation, restitution to all victims, and a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board. The judge's statement was brief but pointed. You abused a position of trust to systematically defraud your neighbors and enrich yourself. Your actions harmed people who wanted nothing more than to live peacefully in their homes. That betrayal warrants significant consequences. I didn't attend the sentencing. I was too busy in my vineyard, pruning vines and preparing for spring growth. But Marcus called me afterward with the details. Justice was served, he said simply. And thanks to this case, the state legislature is already drafting new laws requiring oversight of HOA boundary changes and creating penalties for fraudulent filings. So something good came from it, I said. Something great came from it, Marcus corrected. You stood up when most people would have walked away. That matters. Spring came to the Bitterroot Valley with an explosion of green. My vines leafed out strong and healthy, their tendrils reaching toward the sun. I hired help for the busy season, a local college kid named Tyler who wanted to learn about viticulture, and an older gentleman named Frank who'd worked vineyards in California before retiring to Montana. Together, we tended the rows Sarah and I had dreamed about, and slowly, beautifully, those dreams came alive. In late April, Diana Reeves visited to do a follow-up story. Montana's David defeats HOA Goliath was the headline. She walked the vineyard with me, photographing the healthy vines, the rebuilt barn, the new fence I'd installed with a simple sign, Dalton Vineyard Private Property. Visitors, welcome. How does it feel? She asked. To win? I looked out at the mountains, snow still capping their peaks, and thought about Sarah, about the napkin sketches, about the life we'd planned, and the life I was finally living. It doesn't feel like winning, I said honestly. It feels like surviving, like finally being allowed to just exist without someone trying to control every aspect of it. That's freedom, Diana said quietly. Yeah, I agreed. I guess it is. She published the story in May. It was picked up by national outlets, shared thousands of times online, and even prompted a documentary filmmaker to contact me about telling the broader story of HOA abuse. I declined. I'd said everything I needed to say. Now I just wanted to grow grapes and live quietly. But the impact rippled beyond me. The Montana legislature passed the Landowner Protection Act in June, creating strict oversight for HOA boundary changes, requiring registered landowner notifications for any expansion attempts, and establishing significant penalties for filing fraudulent jurisdictional claims. Other states started looking at similar legislation. Landowner rights groups used my case as an example of why HOA reform was necessary. And slowly, quietly, the culture started to shift. People started questioning whether giving that much power to volunteer neighborhood boards was ever a good idea. By summer, my vineyard was thriving. The vines were heavy with small green clusters that would become grapes by fall. I'd started the process of getting licensed as a commercial winery, planning to release my first vintage in 2026. I'd name it Sarah's Dream, because that's what it was. And every bottle would be a tribute to the woman who taught me that the best things in life are worth fighting for. On a warm August evening, I sat on the porch of my barn with a glass of wine from a neighboring vineyard, watching the sun set behind the Bitterroot Mountains. The sky turned gold, then orange, then deep purple. Stars began appearing one by one. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Another landowner contacted me. Similar situation. Your case gave them courage to fight back. Thank you for that. I smiled and typed back, tell them to document everything and don't give up. Freedom is worth the fight. Because that's what I'd learned through this whole experience. Freedom isn't free. It costs time, money, stress, and sleepless nights. But the alternative, surrendering to people who think they have the right to control you, costs something much more valuable. It costs your dignity, your peace, your dreams. And I wasn't willing to pay that price. Not for Victoria Ashford. Not for anyone. The vineyards stretched out before me in neat rows, each vine representing resilience. They'd survived drought, frost, neglect, and my amateur attempts at viticulture. They'd survived having their water cut off by a petty tyrant who thought paperwork was power, and they'd survived because I fought for them the same way Sarah would have fought, fiercely, intelligently, relentlessly. As darkness settled over the valley, I raised my glass toward the stars. We did it, babe, I whispered. We built the dream. And somewhere in that vast Montana sky, I felt her presence. Not in the lawsuit or the victory or the justice, but in the simple fact that I hadn't given up, that I'd honored our dream by protecting it when it was threatened. That I'd turned grief into action and anger into results. Tomorrow I'd wake early and work the land. I'd prune and water and watch my vines grow stronger. I'd live the life Sarah and I had sketched on napkins years ago, and I'd do it freely, on land that was truly mine, protected by laws that finally recognize that property rights matter more than HOA bylaws. That's freedom. Not the absence of conflict, but the courage to fight when your peace is threatened. Not silence, but the willingness to speak truth when lies are convenient. Not surrender, but the strength to stand your ground when everyone tells you to just comply. I learned that through my experience with Victoria Ashford, through every fake violation notice and every sleepless night. But I learned it, and now I'm living it. Here, on 15 acres of Montana soil, under skies so vast they make you believe anything is possible, growing grapes that will become wine, building a legacy that honors love, living freely in a world that constantly tries to fence you in. And if I could give advice to anyone facing what I faced, it would be this: document everything. Know your property rights, find good lawyers, don't fight alone, use the press when necessary, and never believe someone who tells you that compliance is easier than resistance. Because some things are worth fighting for. your home, your peace, your dreams. The right to exist without someone's permission. Victoria Ashford thought she could take that from me using fake paperwork and real intimidation. She was wrong. Not because I was stronger or smarter or richer, but because I understood something she never did. Power based on lies eventually collapses under the weight of truth. And truth, documented and defended, is the most powerful weapon anyone has. So here's to truth. Here's to fighting for what's yours. Here's to vineyards that survive drought and dreamers who refuse to surrender. Here's to Sarah, who taught me that love builds things strong enough to outlast any storm. And here's to anyone reading this who's facing their own Victoria Ashford, whether it's an HOA president, a corrupt official, or any bully with a clipboard and illusions of authority. You're not alone. Document everything. Find allies. Use the law. Tell your story. And don't back down. Because freedom isn't something they give you. It's something you claim. One document, one boundary line, one grapevine at a time. Now tell me, where are you reading this from? Have you ever dealt with HOA overreach or property rights violations? Drop your story in the comments. You're not alone, and your experience matters. Hit subscribe if you believe property rights are worth defending. And remember, your land is yours, not theirs. Never theirs. No matter how official their paperwork looks, no matter how loudly they threaten, your property rights are protected by law. Not bylaws. Law. Stand your ground. Document everything. Fight smart. And when you win, and you will win if you don't give up, take a moment to look at what you've protected. Really look at it. Feel the weight of what you accomplished. Because you didn't just save your property. You saved your dignity, your autonomy, your right to exist without someone else's permission. That's worth celebrating. That's worth every sleepless night, every dollar spent on lawyers, every moment of fear and doubt. Because at the end of the day, when the lawsuits are settled and the bullies are defeated, you're still standing on your own land, free. And that freedom, that's something no HOA can ever take away. Not with fake violations, not with fraudulent boundaries, not with threats or intimidation or any weapon in their arsenal. Because they were never fighting you. They were fighting the truth. And truth, as I learned in that Montana vineyard, always wins eventually. It just requires someone brave enough to defend it. I was that someone. And if you're facing your own property rights battle, you can be too. The tools are available. The laws exist. The precedents are set. All you need is the courage to use them. So use them. Fight back. Stand up. Protect what's yours. Because your home isn't just a place. It's a sanctuary. A dream. A promise you made to yourself and the people you love. Don't let anyone steal that promise. Not an HOA president. Not a corrupt board. Not anyone. Your property. Your rules. Your freedom. Always.